As I mentioned, 3 witnesses with us here today from Galaxia Mission Systems, Arid Garagosli, the Chief Executive Officer. From Samuel Associates, we have Goran Pesek, the President and Chief Executive Officer. And from Solus Power, we have Neil Chalk, the Chief Executive Officer. Witnesses, you'll each have upwards of 5 minutes for your introductory remarks. I'll start to give you a little wave if you're going over time. From there, we will go into a line of questioning allocated to the political parties represented across the table here from you today. With that, Mr. Garagosli, we will go to you first. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Awesome. Mr. Chair, honorable members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. My name is Arid Garagosli. I am the founder and CEO of Galaxia Mission Systems. We're building sovereign space capabilities for Canada focused on next-generation Earth observation systems in both defense and civil applications. Our goal is simple. Canada should not have to rely on foreign suppliers for core space capabilities. Galaxia is the only company building a fully Canadian space mission where every major component is designed, manufactured, integrated, launched, and operated here at home with Canadian SMEs. This is a true sovereign system, and we are on track to launch this system early 2028, hopefully from Canadian soil. Space is now a cornerstone of modern defense. Every domain of war fighting is relying on space, specifically Arctic awareness, resilience and communication, intelligence gathering, targeting, navigation, and so on. If we want to be a credible and capable partner to our allies, we need to pick up the pace because we cannot afford to lag in this domain anymore. There are several recent reports that came out specifically on Canada's defense capabilities from Canadian Space Agency. RBC just released one, and it's showing a worrying trend of Canada really falling behind. We are the last in the rank of 10 from the Organizations for Economic Cooperation Development, and as well as amongst the G7 countries when it comes to spending, defense spending, and public spending as a whole. When compared to U.S., they're putting about $7 billion annually in venture funds into their space capabilities, and that's about 17-fold more than what Canada is doing per capita. So what do we do about that? The answer to that is Ottawa really must become an anchor client to Canadian defense producers, and space is just a subdomain of that. Canada just simply needs to buy more to enable Canadian SMEs to manufacture and innovate faster to be able to become competitive globally. And we also need to rely less on foreign purchasing and hoping that ITV will fix the gap later on. We just simply need to empower our SMEs to build and innovate. This can happen through strategic procurement, scale, and financial tools focusing on technical excellence. Right now, we create technologies and companies that are just orphan. We are developing a lot of R&D here in Canada, but that's about it. A lot of those companies do not see a longer-term commercialization, so a lot of these companies move abroad, especially in the U.S., to become one of those companies. A very good example of how other nations are doing it in the U.S., we have the SBIR program that is funding these companies through small funds at the beginning, taking them through $200,000 into $1 to $2 million feasibility study, and later on into $50, $60 million procurement programs that really puts a lot of confidence into the ventures and other funds to show that space is truly a commercial market. Let me close with this. Canada used to lead in space. We were early. We were the third country after US and USSR to get into space. We were bold. But leadership does not sustain and survive on nostalgia. We don't really have a lot to talk about when it comes to our future ambitions, and we are really relying on what we have done in the past, and that's risky. We can stay comfortable, watch our most innovative companies leave and grow elsewhere, or we can choose to help them lead globally by staying here in Canada. The window is narrowing. First movers' advantage, especially in space and commercial space, is only months, years, not decades. And this cycle will not break until Ottawa makes a firm decision and commits to building Canada's space and defence capabilities through a modern, predictable, and rapid procurement system that anchors and scales Canadian SMEs. The clock is ticking. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Pesek, we'll go to you next to 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. Bonjour, Madame et Monsieur. Vice Chairs, honourable members of this committee, thank you for this opportunity to address you today regarding Canada's future defence industrial strategy. Let me just set the context here. Canada's security environment is fundamentally shifted, and that's in the past tense. We met a pivotal moment in history. The era of the peace dividend has ended. The assumptions that have carried us through the post-Cold War era have now essentially evaporated and collapsed. We're living through the most significant shift in global security architecture in more than a generation. Budget 2025 recognizes this new reality, and I compliment the government for this very strong budget. With it, the government is being critical of working and reorienting Canada's defence industry. It acknowledges that Canada must first rebuild the foundations of its national defence through its industrial base. It is now time to begin the process of planning how to build a defence industrial strategy that provides Canadian Armed Forces with the tools needed to advance this country's national interests. I will make 3 recommendations to represent what I consider are 3 critical paths to meet the new defence industrial strategy. These are perhaps a little bit unconventional, but I like to be entertaining today just to add some spice. The first is a credible path to Canada's NATO commitments. And what I mean by that, the defence industrial strategy's foundation should be based on a transparent, credible defence spending roadmap to meet our obligation of 2% of our GDP on defence by 2035. A transparent, phased-in, economically grounded plan is essential to ensure that increased defence spending becomes a catalyst for growth, innovation, and resilience. A framework with 3 major pillars I'd like to propose today. Number 1, and this is a difficult one, but please bear with me. 2% of the 5% should be slated toward co-development of continental defence apparatus with the United States. This includes integrating air and missile systems for NORAD modernization, and perhaps a little controversial here, but I'm open to it, procurement of long-range strike capabilities and strategic bombers like the B-21 Raider would provide Canada with significant deterrence. And at the end of the game, we all want deterrence as the end state. And certainly interconnectivity for our Five Eyes partners. 1% out of the NATO 5% should go to Arctic contributions, dedicating a significant portion to building out dual-use infrastructure, ports, including submarine ports with allied interoperability, satellite communications and constellations, northern airfields, icebreakers, and community resilience in the Arctic. 2%, the last 2% of the 5%, should be slated toward manufacturing and development with allied support. This final portion will be given to Canada's interests in Europe and the Indo-Pacific, supporting advanced manufacturing that enhances both collective security and the development of capabilities to mine and exploit, of course, critical minerals. These allocations of the 5%, 2%, 1%, 2%, this allocation reflects a unique geopolitical position that is comparative advantages that it has. Laying down a detailed vision of how to spend this, I believe, is very important. It provides a credible direction to industry. All levels of government, includes Canada, to coordinate with our allies to foster interoperability and interchangeability, which is growing, and provides credible targets to allow benchmarking for performance and accountability. This brings me to my second recommendation, taking a whole-of-nation approach to the defence industrial development. This strategic capability is envisioned cannot be brought alone by money. It requires a whole-of-nation approach that mobilizes the whole of citizenry. This starts with significant intergovernmental coordination with structured federal-provincial alignment. We risk building systems that don't connect, scale, or work. Defense and economic development must move together, not in parallel silos. It also requires solution-based procurement Right now, innovation and procurement barely speak to each other. Requirements take years to develop. Risk tolerances are extremely low. To bring a culture of solution-based procurement, I recommend the institutionalization of this particular new office that I like to propose today, the Office of Defense Innovation and Commercialization, to bring together customers directly to producers. This model allows the Canadian Armed Forces to raise capabilities they demand and to ask industry to compete and propose optimal solutions. Let me just say that this particular Office of Defense Innovation and Commercialization could be situated within the new Defense Investment Agency, perhaps DRDC, or perhaps even at ISED. So that's just a proposition. I would like to also bring my third point: citizenship, duty, and national
President,
participation.
sorry to interrupt. We are now over the time that's been allotted. However, there are lots of questions that members have, and I suspect that through their generosity, they will prod you to get to that third point. So I'm sorry to interrupt you, sir, but I do have to keep us on schedule.
Thank you very much.
Madame Dancho, the floor is yours first. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Chalk. See, look at this. I'm flustered. Mr. Chalk, the floor is yours for upwards of 5 minutes, and then we'll go to our line of questioning.
All right,
Thank you.
I'll try to keep it quick, snappy. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, for this opportunity to contribute to Canada's defence industrial strategy. This study comes at a pivotal moment. Canada faces an intensifying global security pressure, long-deferred capital reinvestment requirements, and an unprecedented scale of forthcoming defence expenditure. A central question is how to maximize the benefits of these investments so that Canada develops the sovereign industrial capabilities that are needed to equip Canadian Armed Forces while strengthening Canadian competitiveness and economic resilience. We need our chosen strategy to deliver on near-term objectives while also being effective over the long term. In this context, it is essential that a modern DIS focus on the segment of Canadian industry best positioned to deliver near-term capability, generate enduring intellectual property, and become global champions of Canadian technology. That segment is a technology scale-up sector. These are firms that have progressed beyond startup experimentation. They possess validated products and revenue. They already employ experienced teams and are poised for accelerated growth. They are a source of technology and vital intellectual property, and they will make a massive difference to our country. So why should scale-ups be the centerpiece of Canada's DIS? First, they can deliver relevant capability rapidly. They're characterized by validated technology. They have existing production and pilot customers. They have experienced leadership and engineering teams. They have a readiness for rapid production expansion. They are a very natural source of unique, strong intellectual property. For defense procurement, where programs run long and integration is complex and operational reliability is non-negotiable, scale-ups offer an optimum blend of innovation and maturity. These firms are already solving commercial and government problems, and Canadian Armed Forces adoption become an acceleration, not an invention exercise. Secondly, scale-ups can deliver operational advantage to the Canadian Armed Forces. Canadian scale-ups are active in fields directly aligned with CAF needs: advanced sensors, harsh environment, power electronics, wireless communications, cyber defense, and so on. Supporting these companies through procurement preference enables the CAF to adopt capabilities that reduce platform vulnerabilities, increase reliability and performance, shorten logistics and maintenance cycles, and allows Canada to field differentiated and higher performing capabilities among its allies. Thirdly, scale-ups are the engines of Canadian IP creation. A large amount of Canadian IP that reaches global markets come from scale-ups, firms that have the capacity to file patents, harden technology, commercialize globally, all while retaining ownership within Canada. Strengthening them helps Canada avoid IP leakage stage, where early-stage companies are often acquired by foreign entities before their technology matures. And we see this every day, not every day, very frequently in the media. A scale-up focused DIS ensures that Canada grows acquirers, not the acquired, which is where we certainly are. So the next question that I want to proposes, so how does support of scale-ups build a sovereign Canadian defense industrial base? Well, government demand is a very strong catalyst. We don't see a lot of it today, but it is super strong if we had it. You can see it in other countries because history shows us that the most durable defense industries globally, in the UK, the US, 2 examples, they actually grew their domestic procurement deliberately. They were not shy of giving preference to domestic companies. And I don't think we can say we enjoy that situation. When the Canadian Armed Forces buys Canadian technology, 3 critical things happen. Companies scale rapidly, sustainably. Canadian IP is entrenched in CAF platforms and architectures. And export opportunities grow by validation of a Five Eyes military, namely the CAF. This is the most powerful industrial strategy that Canada can deploy if you want to grow an industrial base. Additionally, I'm almost done, scale-ups can convert that support into industrial capacity. They will increase employment in Canada, accelerate the next generation R&D, and all while anchoring IP and ownership in Canada. Each dollar invested in scale-ups produces a multiplicative return in employment, IP retention, and long-term competitiveness. These firms are where Canada will get the fastest, most reliable, and most sovereign outcome. So my proposed policy recommendation is to make scale-ups the centerpiece for a defense industrial strategy. Prioritize scale-up technologies companies for procurement-linked support. Create mechanisms such as early CAF adoption, field trials, and rapid procurement pathways, and maintain industrial benefits programs such as ITBs and procurement decisions that encourage scale-up participation.
Mr. Chalk, I'm sorry, I gave you the same 30 additional I gave to the previous witness, and it would be quite unjust of me to let you go any further beyond that. So we are going to go into our line of questioning, and Madame Dancho, the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for your opening testimony. Appreciate it very much. Mr. Chalk, I appreciated your comments and also your board chair of Solus Power. I believe his name is Neil Desai. Yes, he's made some interesting comments over the last number of months that I wanted to put to you, and I think they're certainly quite in line with what you're putting forward. He said, the number one issue I see for our country is that our economics don't work. He went on to say structures in Canada around talent, capital, intellectual property, companies' freedom to operate look very different only a decade ago, with entrepreneurs saying that a welcoming and supportive ecosystem put wind in their sails at that time. He then said, but those structures have changed during the last 10 years. The wind has actually been in their face of the entrepreneurs who are trying to do this at scale from Canada for the benefit of all Canadians. And he really describes Canada as having, quote, this weird innovations ecosystem structural problem not seen in other countries, where intermediaries such as financiers, universities, and business incubators and accelerators are put at the center for validating business. Everywhere else, the business gets to validate business. So with your comments on IP, obviously we need a very robust ecosystem to support the scale-ups that you've talked about. So in light of some of his comments, can you give the committee a few more ideas and for our policy discussion of what the Canadian government should be doing to facilitate this type of renewed ecosystem for entrepreneurs?
Thank you very much. That's a complex question. I'll try to do my very best to answer it. And I certainly can't speak for Neil Desai, but I would say having the incubators and all the various supports you see for small business startups and not so much scale-ups, but certainly startups in Canada is a very healthy thing, and you see a lot of companies get going. But the statistics around success rates of startups are pretty terrible. You do get validation through incubation and some of the sort of nurturing that happens there, but the most true validation of a business is from the market, and I think that's what we're probably missing. Procurement in Canada is a game where we play not to lose, to quote Ahmad Driscoll, one of my friends. We're not playing to win. So we're very careful, we're very cautious, and of course it's taxpayers' money, and we should be. But I think we need to be prepared to take more risks in the procurement. And if the Canadian Armed Forces, if this opportunity with the current expansion of investment is going to provide the opportunity for full participation across this country, I think we can get a lot of validation that's true to the market, that builds a lot of scale-ups into bigger and medium-sized companies.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garagosali. I saw you nodding your head quite a bit there, and your opening comments as well, I think, hit on a lot of this. I think in particular you said we need to rely less on foreign purchasing, rather we need to empower our small and medium enterprises to innovate. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'm specifically talking on the space side, but I'm pretty sure defense as a whole, because even on the maritime domain, we are really relying on, we are becoming a purchaser. And again, specifically talking on the space side, Canada just recently signed a contract on WildFireSat. Canada does not have a very active space ecosystem when it comes to contracting active projects. We just signed a Wildfire project. It's phase one, $150 million, I believe. The company that has that project is an American company and a German company. And I don't think that's anyone's fault. I don't think there are any Canadian companies that are put out of that. The reason behind it is we simply just do not have those sort of systems that have been built in Canada that can come back and respond to those needs. So we end up basically just going out into the market and seeing what other countries are building and say, hey, can we use your systems? We'll pay for it. And that's very dangerous because a lot of these capabilities across all defense domain do need to be, I guess we kind of need to pick and choose which areas we're working with. You know, we have a very strong shipbuilding program. But when it comes to other domains of defense, are we going to just become a purchaser, or are we going to put our foot down and say some of these emerging markets, including commercial space, are very raw? However, we've got countries like US, Germany is a very good example of that. A lot of G7 countries putting significant amount of funds behind these. And we're just simply falling way behind, and we're just going to sit in the back and just become purchasers.
I believe last year you were a witness at Defense Committee, and you mentioned, I'll just quote you, quote, "We must increase support for the Canadian Space Agency to ensure that research and development is essential. Space capabilities continue to grow." So it sounds like, of course, you would appreciate more support, and for that to really support our ecosystem in Canada in the space industry. And of course, the Liberals just announced $500 million for the European Space Agency. So do you feel that perhaps that money should have been the Canadian Space Agency to better support our local? Or how do you see this working in the grander
So
scale?
that $580 million, I believe, that is going to European Space Agency via Canadian Space Agency, as we are a contributing member to that. That is a very good program. However, one thing about that is you do have to find a European partner to work with to unlock that $500 million. So it's not like we can just go to European Space Agency and say, hey, we want to work on a project, and they're like, here's a $500 million project. The problem with that is just finding that European partner in a lot of these cases, because again, we do have a very good relationship with European Space Agency. That program is very good if it could be co-aligned with another similar investments that is directly invested into the Canadian companies to bring them up to a point that they are on the same playing field with the German, let's say, or UK companies, because we simply are not. Right now, if you look at the space ecosystem in Canada, it's not a really diverse ecosystem. You've got one or two companies that are generating a lot of products, and they have exports. But when you look at the SMEs, that's just a huge unbalance there, if you will.
Thank you.
So it would be good if that money could be collaborated with the same amount back directly into the Canadian industry as well.
Thank you, Madame Dancho. Mr. Nur Mohammed, welcome to the Industry Committee. The floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. Mr. Chalk, I just wanted to pick up on something that you were just speaking about, and I'm curious actually in the context of capital structures in this country. One of the big challenges obviously is, you know, when you have companies like yours, when they're in the earliest stages, one of the big questions is how do we make sure that the capital structures in this country are able to support the assurance that these companies that are doing leading edge work, particularly in defense, are able to remain sovereign. One of the observations people would make is that particularly in early stage companies, the access to capital, particularly in the space like yours, and I would imagine space as well, is severely constrained. vis-a-vis the U.S. What should we be looking at in this country to incentivize the private sector, and Canadian capital in particular, to start making the types of investments they seem more comfortable to making in similar ventures in other countries and are more reluctant to make into similar Canadian companies? Like, what is the mindset challenge that we need to overcome when it comes to capital coming into the types of companies to do the type of innovative work to build the defense sector in the way which we need to do it? So perhaps I'll start with you, Mr. Chalk.
Thank you. The mindset in this country, the capital is very specifically focused on what is currently going to be the buzz for the whatever that is. Today it's AI and so on. So it seems the entire market just swings it with whatever the current technology is. And partly it's because, and maybe we should be a little forgiving, but we're not a large country really, economically we're not. So we have a smaller set of opportunities, but it is definitely, and I mean, again, this is lots of data out there for this, but if you're looking for an investment in Canada and you're not in a swim lane that's part of what everybody recognizes as a good bet today, whatever that is, at one point it was SaaS companies, then you're going to have to go to the U.S. And it doesn't matter if you start in Canada. And when we did it, we had one round, we bootstrapped ourselves for years, got one investor. It turned out to be a U.S. company. We talked to 200 different potential investors here and couldn't get anybody. But a customer bought us, and we have a product going in production in automotive next year. We've done a ton of business with Boeing and a bunch of others and couldn't get an investor. So, and because we're a hardware company, so hardware now today is not a cool thing. And it is a bit of a culture. What the government can do is I don't actually know, except for, I think, fostering this ecosystem, building up a culture of starting, worrying about scale-ups, medium-sized companies, and some of them will grow to large. This is, you see Germany. Germany is a fantastic example of a massive number of medium and large companies.
So this is one of the challenges, obviously, that it isn't for government to wave a magic wand and say, we can solve this. I think, to your point, the ecosystem in this country, the investment community in this country needs to shift its own psychology. And I wonder, as an entrepreneur, if you were to speak directly to the PE and VC funds and pension funds in this country that carry the massive sort of opportunity of investing and are willing to do so in other countries, what would you say to them about the opportunities available to them in Canada? Because I think this is one of the things that we need to be able to emphasize. There are great innovative companies, particularly in this sector, in this space, when we're talking about national sovereignty, that aren't seeing the same action from our own investors.
Well, for me, I think they can take the statistics, take a math approach to this, and we still need to support startups. So I'll say that in the beginning. Startups are where scale-ups come from, but scale-ups are much less risky. Once you pass a stage and you become the 50, 70 person company and have customers already, and you have a proven technology, a proven product, you have markets internationally, your revenue, your probability of failure is much lower. And you're clearly, someone wants it. If you can use that as a metric to make investments, I think there's a reasonable risk there that the taxpayer probably could support.
Thank you. And with the remaining time that I have, I'm going to go to Mr. Pesek. It's good to see you after, I guess, close to 20 years. And I actually want to take you back 20 years to a trip that we took to visit NATO in Brussels. And one of the conversations that was happening 20 years ago was about sovereign wealth funds in markets putting and making investments in aerospace, in defense, and industrial that would support sovereignty at that time. And through successive governments of different parties, we've never really broached the idea of a sovereign wealth fund that looks at defense, that looks at sectors and aerospace, so on and so forth. Do you think it's time for us to start thinking about that?
Yes, thank you, and it's good to see you. I have a little bit whiter hair, but 20 years has gone by in a flash, so nice to see you, and congratulations. I think that we need to look at the notion of patient capital. Patient capital, and just to your earlier point, could come from the pension funds, and definitely a sovereign wealth fund of some form, or however we determine patient capital needs to look like. But I just want to say that we need to define what that means in our context. This is all new. So whatever we believe Canada needs, we shouldn't be looking to other countries for examples. We need to create with our home-owned solutions opportunities that are meeting our current circumstances and our marketplace needs and demands. The defense industry is a managed economy, and it is outside the normal business cycle. So if the normal business cycle is 5 to 7 years, just say, for example, basically the defense business cycle is one of potentially 10 or 15 or even 20 years or a generation even. So this managed economy needs to be seen as such, with different rules that apply versus market-based rules that are for the commercial market.
Thank you, Mr. Normohan. Monsieur Saint-Marie, bonjour. 6 minutes à vous.
Alors, bonjour à tous. Merci.
Well, good afternoon, one and all. Thank you, witnesses, for being here. I'd like to begin with Mr. Pesic, Samuel Associates. You didn't expand very much on your third point, so I'd like to give you the time to do so if you'd like.
The third point, thank you, is this notion that integrated defense literacy needs to be amongst our population. And I like to propose that a national day of recruitment to celebrate service and inspire national pride, provincial and regional and local, be celebrated on the first Monday in June. This is about creating a team environment. So, for instance, how does Canadian Tire, how does Tim Hortons, McDonald's, anyone wearing a uniform get involved? And honestly, I see the National Day of Recruitment as a great opportunity for them to show how they're doing work in the service industry under a team, under a uniform that is delivering excellence to customers. So that notion is how we can get those sectors of the economy, especially the service sector, as an excellent place to promote a National Day of Recruitment. I like to also just mention something important, and that is not to forget our veterans. Our veterans, at the moment, according to an organization that we've supported and continue to work with, Homes for Heroes Foundation, there are 10,000 homeless Canadian veterans currently, according to a McGill study that they had commissioned. Well, when you think about defense industrial strategy, we need to think about those veterans in different categories. I like to consider that the ITB program or Canadian content, or however we get involved with the metrics around obligation towards some projects, that perhaps a veterans component can be seen as improving the ITB regime, or whatever perhaps point system that one would get in a competition on an RFP. So thank you very much. That was my last point, and I hope that that completes my thoughts on some recommendations today. Merci.
Je vous remercie beaucoup. Je reviendrai probablement.
Thank you very much. I'll probably come back with further questions with you, but I'd like to have a point of view from Mr. Chuck. You didn't have time to complete your presentation, so if you'd like to summarize it for us now, we'd be pleased to hear it.
Merci beaucoup. I was nearly done, actually, too, as well. But, and apologies for that. I actually did try to time it. And, anyway. So my final point was regarding the policy recommendation. And I just got to figure the phrase out. There you go. So the last part was to maintain industrial benefits programs and procurement decisions to encourage scale-up participation, ensure that scale-ups have access to long-term procurement visibility, continued support of the regional development associations, such as Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency and Western Diversification Fund, and so on, export support through the Trade Commissioner Service. These are all essential things, and they're so much a force multiplier for startups. It's impossible to overstate. And IP retention and development incentives. That's it. Thank you.
OK, bien, merci beaucoup. Donc, je reviens, monsieur.
Thank you. I'll come back to Mr. Bektik. I have 2 minutes left, and perhaps you could describe in greater detail the office or agency that would provide assistance and support to producers.
Merci beaucoup. The proposed new Office of Defense Innovation and Commercialization is intended to be a one-stop stop for companies, associations, the interested entrepreneurs, others. I like to look at it as a window into what we consider all the defense innovation initiatives. So those companies that are looking for grants could have a place to go to get information and qualification. Information such as getting a security clearance or participating in programs on the innovation side could be seen as that. So this is a very high-level proposal that I'm suggesting. On the commercialization side, this is a very big valley of death slope that really a lot of companies hit. So they may get, for example, Government of Canada money to participate in a program like the IDEAS program, but what they fall off is the notion of commercialization. No government currently organization or department agency or Crown Corporation has the opportunity to help that company to the next step of commercialization. So that could be seen as something important. And also, this office could serve as the hub for intellectual property. So as government is giving grants and developing innovative technologies, it could be seen as working with companies on how to protect that IP. And what does that actually mean? Does the government want to purchase some of the IP, provide royalties to IP? And also, how does one secure IP from adversaries? So we don't necessarily have answers, but that would be some of the early stage discussions on this new Office of Defense Innovation and Commercialization. Merci beaucoup.
Je vous remercie beaucoup. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Merci.
Thank you to the witnesses. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, your generosity makes me look like a miser here.
The floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses here this evening at committee. Mr. Garagolzi, I'd like to start with you, if I may. You talked about there being more investment dollars available in the U.S. for venture capitalists and things like that. I'm a little curious, though, in the process because we are looking at the whole procurement for the department. So you, as a company, a space company, do you have to come up with an idea of a shiny new object that you have to sell to somebody? Do you get your direction from the government in their budget or in their vision as to what's needed, or does the department come to you and say, this is what we would like you to come up with, can you develop this?
That's a really good question. I think that can come in different formats depending on what the direction of the company is. When it comes to defense, it's a bit of a tricky area because I would say many Canadian companies do not have the classification to be able to have those talks with our CAF freely to understand what those gaps are, what the requirements are, and then put forward almost a proposal and say, for example, if you're looking at sovereign and Arctic communication systems, or you're looking at above-ground horizon systems, what are the gaps? Where can we come in, and where does that innovation comes in? So programs like IDEAS come in, and they kind of propose this general idea, say, we're looking at enhancing communication. Anybody has ideas. So that's kind of one stream that a lot of companies kind of look at that and say, and you almost like try to understand what those requirements are, and it's a shot in the dark, and most of the time they might not be true. In second case, you can kind of look at what other countries are doing, what sort of capabilities they have, and can be developed the same things here, because we certainly use a lot of those capabilities, especially when it comes to Earth intelligence, as well as communication and things like that. We simply do not own a lot of those capabilities, so some companies may look elsewhere and
Buy those capabilities from some of our defense partners. Does it come with source code?
No, most of the time, no. And we just kind of buy that as a system, if that. So most of the time, we get access to, again, depending on the platform you're talking about, but most of the time, we just, for example, get access to that data. And in a lot of those cases, those data almost goes through a filtration system to, for example, see if is Canada okay to own that sort of data or intelligence, for instance.
Good, thank you. Mr. Chalk, I'd like to expand a little bit on some of your comments. Your board chair has previously stated that there have been a lot of headwinds when it comes to developing products in the last 10 years under this Liberal government. They haven't created an environment for entrepreneurship and innovation. Startups are very different than scale-ups. When you access government money, and you talked about most of our IP leaves this country for commercial purposes, is there a government opportunity to create equity in these companies when they provide initial funding?
Well, I would say there's an opportunity. It's not typically done. Usually it's a loan from the RDAs or like ACOA. That could be a consideration. One of the things that I see as a problem with the way it is today is that transitioning from a startup to a scale-up, the magnitude of money required to sustain a scale-up, your payroll goes from a couple $100,000 a month to $1 million a month or so, and then more. And then sort of the level of risk that the RDAs and others are willing to take to invest in you, or in other words, the amount of money is not there. And there's really no mechanism today that I know of. Maybe the SIF program under ISED, but that's not as easy to get either.
But Boeing has made a significant investment in your company. And
yes.
And is that because there's government incentives in the United States for them to do that, or is that just because they see commercial value?
So Boeing gets ITBs when they do anything with us because we're a small Canadian startup or scale up. But all of our business, with one exception with Boeing, was projects on the CH-47 or other things that we were doing work that they wanted done. We were probably one of the only companies in the world that does a harsh environment type wireless power thing that we do. So it's even underwater we can transfer energy. So we've done a lot of helicopter work, most with them. They did it, of course, ITB sweetened the pot, but also we've got last year a $10.3 million in an investment framework. That was also the recipient, or made them get the multiplier for the investment framework. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Falk. Madame O'Rourke, floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Mr. Garagosli, your presentation really resonates because we heard a presentation 2 weeks ago at the space reception, and the head of Space Canada, I believe, said there's no defense without space. Like there's no telecoms, there's no surveillance, all that stuff. We need space. So your point was very well taken. I'm just curious. So this budget 2025 is going to have nearly $82 billion over 5 years in defense. We'll meet that 2% NATO commitment, and we're throwing a path to meeting the 5%. So I'm just wondering, is it not sufficient? Is it should it be allocated differently? So just really quickly, if you can do that, because I've got a couple other questions for the other.
That amount is sufficient, but how much of that is actually going to, number one, directly into space capability development programs, and how much of that money is actually going to advance a lot of these SMEs from a startup scale to a scale-up stage? Those are very important.
So if I can just ask you then, we've also introduced a productivity super deduction and also a new SHRED program that is expanded. So would either of those also be helpful in terms of the space sector, because they're sector agnostic?
The SHRED programs and the R&D kind of rebate programs as a whole, they're good, but a lot of these companies at this stage, we just need direct funding in form of projects to be able to build rapidly instead of trying to spend money up front and then go through the process to be able to reclaim those. So a lot of, again, going from scale of a startup into a point that we can be an export-ready SME, any of these companies, the most efficient way of doing that is if we have multiple programs that can propose projects that building these capabilities across all defense domains and say, this is going to be a 5-year program, let's say even a $15 million, but that creates predictability, that allows companies like us to hire talent, train them, and be able to build that infrastructure that is actually much more important. But without that, it's just there is a lot of uncertainty. Private sector investments is not that excited about it either.
So you're looking for a project that calls for proponents, not you develop something and then seek a contract. Is that right?
Yes, ideally.
Okay. To the other witnesses, Budget 2025 also introduces a $1 billion small medium business credit program for defense contracts. And so I'm wondering 2 things about that. One, is that a welcome addition? And 2, the United States have what are called Apex accelerators to help small, medium business bid on government contracts. Is that something you would recommend for Canada?
I can take this one.
Sure.
As I mentioned earlier, I think that when we look at the Canadian jurisdiction, our own framework, our own realities, we should try to create programs that will work for us. So even though there are models working under different jurisdictions, like in the United States with the DoD and others, they're in a different category. There's also a lot of heritage there that they have, how they've been working, how they've been reforming recently. My suggestion is that we really look for a made in Canada, Canadian-made solution. I think we have enough intelligent people to come up with a unique Canadian-made program to fit the needs that Canadian startups, scale-ups, large, small, those that are, entrepreneurs trying to access these funds. That's my suggestion. We have an opportunity to do something by ourselves, for ourselves. Let's take that on with serious challenge and output.
Okay, thank you. I had another question for you, Mr. Peshek. You talked about the whole of nation approach and mobilizing the whole citizenry, and talk about defense literacy. So at our first or second meeting, we had an assistant deputy minister who came, who said to us, we don't have time for silos, and she said explicitly, this is not peacetime, right? I suspect most Canadians going about their business, they're not thinking that. So what do you think of the concept of having, more citizens engaged? And it's been the case in other countries, so while we should have our Made in Canada model, but mobilizing citizens when there's, emergency preparedness or things like that. Do you think Canada should be looking at a model where there's more preparedness on the part of regular people?
Yes, very fair question. And I think that the old public safety ads that were ran, I think perhaps 10 or 15 years ago about being ready for 72 hours still apply today as they applied when they were first rolled out in any striped government. I think that's an important public safety message. Be ready for 72 hours. Given the climate, given where we live, that's just, I think, an ongoing message. I do like to propose again this notion of a national day of recruitment. We don't have such a thing. Perhaps others do, we don't. But again, a Canadian solution for Canadian times. And what I like to think of it as, when we're talking about ITB programs, why not include Canadian Tire, Tim Hortons, McDonald's, anyone that is wearing a uniform, or even veterans organizations. A national day of recruitment should be seen as something we should celebrate as a way of bringing new Canadians into perhaps the Canadian military system, and also Canadians that are looking for alternative employment that maybe didn't consider a military career or even as a reservist opportunity. This is something that could be done, I would say, rarely inexpensively. However, the commercial market out there, these perhaps retailers, just as an example, I think would welcome such an opportunity to get involved in a new defense industrial strategy. This is what I'm proposing, and it is something of a mind shift, but we need to think differently in these times that you're describing as sort of the end of peace times and perhaps the time of preparation that a lot of nations are signaling, like the United States.
Merci beaucoup, Madame O'Rourke. Monsieur Saint-Marie.
Mr. Semire, it's your turn once again. There are no more opening remarks, so perhaps now you can go with your questions. Well, thank you very much, Chair. For Mr. Peshek, and if I have enough time, I'll ask questions of the others. How can the government evaluate and quantify success? What kind of criteria should we be looking for?
C'est une bonne question, monsieur.
Excellent question.
I think that success has to be seen in non-material terms. We talk about sovereignty. What does that mean? That can't be quantified in material terms. That is a much higher order thing. Success has to be seen as preparing Canada for the 21st century under current geopolitical constraints and partnerships and shifting interests, and see success as such as, for example, building the railway from coast to coast, a vision that someone had that others bought into, a nation that got behind an idea that till this day we are still using those rail networks 150 years later, let's say. That was something of success that nobody ever thought back then, but they saw the potential of large-scale infrastructure projects, as we're talking about infrastructure, but also nation-building projects. We need to think in the context of a successful country is a country in perpetual nation-building status. We need to be seen as not armchair participants, and the arena is in front of us, and others are somehow dictating what the game looks like. We need to be seen as every day in this house and other businesses and universities in the craft of nation building. Nation building is a very important process because once we stop, other adversaries, they haven't. They have ambitions that may overtake ours. So I'm just saying success is something that has to be defined in national terms, strategic terms. At a military level, I would say if Canada can provide a significant defense deterrent, so in other words, a deterrence against adversaries and with our allies, including the United States and NATO and partners, against allies, then that is a major success for all of Canada for the future. I hope that answers your question. It is a hard one, but it is more existential and philosophical than it is perhaps one that is material.
Tout à fait. Merci beaucoup. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Merci.
Thank you much, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Samari.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Garagosli, Galaxia has gone further than most startups. So you launched Mobius One, you secured CSA and DND support, yet you also told the National Defense Committee that the current bureaucratic procurement process still blocks new space firms from fully engaging. So based on your experience, what specific parts of the procurement process need to be improved so our tech startups can actually scale?
I think it is still, it requires a significant overhaul. So we just secured a new contract with Department of National Defense for our CTOS project. It's a Canadian Tactical Operations Satellite. To just give you an example, from the time that we were awarded that until we actually got the contract signed, it took us more than, I would say, 14 or 15 months. That is a forever time in a startup life cycle. A company can easily go under before that contract even materializes. So a big part of that is just, again, these programs are just not designed for the new generations of companies that are coming up. They're trying to build rapidly. They want to iterate as fast as possible. Again, when you're looking at, for example, U.S., almost like every regiment of U.S., like Special Ops or Air Force, even CIA, they have their own almost investment funds that, from an idea until investment, it's a 1 to 3 month process. You go, you pitch, you put your product in front of them, and they're like, I like it, here's the first round of contracting. We need to kind of, if you're looking at startups and not larger kind of primes, we need to have a better approach, more like a venture capital approach. Even organizations like BDC, I feel like they're still moving at a government scale and at the government pace. So I think there is a lot to learn from, again, a venture world to be able to kind of keep up with the startup pace and be able to support their innovation.
So in the past, you've described Galexia's satellite as software defined with AI on board for real-time insights that could be critical for Arctic surveillance, for NORAD-related missions. Yet we continue to hear, as you've just been saying, it takes years sometimes to move from demonstrations to deployed capability. So if we're serious as a country about faster time to field under the new defense industrial strategy, what specific decisions do you think we should need to be taken so we can avoid this becoming just another pilot project for most companies?
I think we need to target, number one, CAF's needs when it comes to defense. So what do we actually need, either in maritime, underwater, space, whatever that is. And then when those companies approach CAF, we can rapidly give them a project and say, here's the phase one. You build it, it takes about $1 million, but we ensure that that's going to turn into a commercial contract to say, for example, in our case, right now, we're building the satellite. It's going to launch in 2027, I believe. But there is absolutely no path after that. We're not going to scale this up. It's just a demonstration mission. It's absolutely crucial to have a path forward after that to say, let's say, here's a $50 million contract that is going to bring you for the next 5 years to commercialize this and export it even.
So you've also said that Canada needs launch capabilities for satellites to be shot into space. So, like, what kind of minimum launch capacity do you think Canada needs on its own soil to like credibly claim space independence?
Right now, a lot of especially military operations happens within the low Earth orbit of Earth. That's about 500 kilometers above Earth. We've got companies like Maritime Launch Services based in Canso. We've got companies like Reaction Dynamics that are building the hybrid launch vehicle. They can bring up to 200, 300, 400 kilogram of payload into space in launch responsive format. You can launch them within months. And that is perfectly fine to respond to what we need right now and to catch up with the rest of the world. So we are on the right track. But again, even within those domains, because we work with those guys a lot, you can, even in that domain, you can see that the investment is moving slow. I mean, there was a recent commitment of, I believe, $185 million to launch capability. So that's a really good sign. But to be perfectly honest, $180 million Canadian is a drop in a bucket when compared to other nations building launch capability, space capability. So it just needs to be significantly boosted so we can just keep up.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Mr. Gugelmin. Okay, Mr. Baines, you'll close off this round with 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us here today. I'll begin with Mr. Pesich. There's over around 600 different defense manufacturing, service providers, suppliers in Canada, and many of them in that ecosystem are concentrated in different regions and hubs around the country. My home province of British Columbia, my home city has Boeing. We have MDA Space, Geospatial Intelligence. We have a strong aerospace sector. So I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on how the government can leverage these regional strengths to build a more integrated defense industrial ecosystem.
Very good question. I just offer some insights and suggestions here. I think that when we're looking at the notion of a defense industrial strategy that will lead to a policy eventually, we need to think of it as a set within a national industrial strategy. So when we talk about dual-use companies, a lot of companies are producing, actually, I would just maybe even go on to say it's really tri-use. And what I mean by tri-use is consumer, commercial, defense, and national security. So dual-use, in my opinion, actually, there's 3 things, because that consumer and commercial are kind of grouped together, and then you have defense and national security on that side. So I think the government just needs to make a conscious decision to create like was created many decades ago, and that is, Ontario does autos, for example, and specializes in the Ontario area for the purposes of concentration and scale and an ecosystem. That was many, many decades ago. Aerospace in Montreal, for example, again, that was an architecture that was envisioned many, many decades ago. I think what we are talking today is more about ecosystems, right? So how do we create ecosystems that create a portfolio of capabilities and then have regional distribution. So instead of making just a widget that somehow gets sent to the other side of the country, we may want to think about a portfolio of capabilities that can be applied to national security, defense, export orientation. Because I think what we're ultimately creating is a community of companies and entrepreneurs and a new culture of cooperation with the government and maybe lenders or others in a new way. But I think we have to think about portfolio of capabilities. And it's okay if there is a portfolio of capabilities within British Columbia, and it's okay to have a completely similar looking portfolio in Halifax, for example, in Nova Scotia, but some of those portfolios might be different. You might have, for example, some space capabilities in there, some be cyber, some could be maritime, some could be other types of advanced manufacturing. So when the government is looking at, I need a capability for a future concept of operation, where can I go? So if I have a portfolio of capabilities, it's easy to send out, a group email and then get some feedback. That's just a straightforward suggestion.
Thank you. And maybe I'll go to Mr. Hopefully I'm saying it correctly, Garagosli? Garagosli, got it. You mentioned something about the venture capital and finances. We've heard from other witnesses prior to your panel coming on, talking about maybe the stigma in defense around and financial backing and the stigma along with defense. There's been terms like we've heard debanking, a term being thrown out there for people that are in the defense area and difficult for them to get financial support. Maybe if you can talk about that financial ecosystem and what we maybe need to do to ensure that there's financial backing for a lot of the startups.
I would say it's very hard to secure financing for, I'm going to say, real technologies, and I'm talking hardware. I don't know whoever did this. It was a very intelligent play because it really made, as Mr. Chuck kind of alluded to, that hardware is just not interesting. So a lot of companies are just focusing on SaaS, whereas nobody's investing into the infrastructure. But the reality of it is if you do not have that infrastructure, that entire SaaS thing falls apart. Doesn't matter if you're building airplanes or you're building data centers. Building hardware, building infrastructure is very expensive, is very risky, and it's very difficult and complex. But there is a reason for it that not a lot of people are going after, and that's it. But once you achieve that, then you're in a position that you can actually attract investments into your country. You can have people that come to you and say, hey, I want to be part of this ecosystem, as opposed to having salespeople coming to our country and say, come buy our capabilities. So for that reason, I don't think, on average, Canadian investors are educated about hardware and infrastructure. They look at it and, again, compared to most other countries, they just do not have the capital either to deploy. So I think that's where the government comes in to de-risk a lot of these infrastructures and say, I'm going to purchase about $250 million worth of this infrastructure. And if I do that, I'm pretty sure a lot of other private investors are going to follow on. Until we don't do that, we're not going to sell domestically. And if we don't sell domestically, obviously we're not going to be able to sell globally efficiently either.
Thanks very much, Mr. Baines. Okay.